Welcome to today's webinar on Oak Ridge National Laboratory's Mega DC, Modeling Energy Growth Associated with Data Centers. My name is Camille Norton, and I serve as the Program Coordinator on the National Association of State Energy Officials Electricity Program. For those of you unfamiliar, NASEO is a national nonprofit that supports all 56 state and territory energy offices throughout the U.S. NASEO serves as a resource for and about state energy offices on a wide spectrum of energy topics and through a variety of means. One of the ways we do this is through events such as this, hosting national dialogues on emerging energy issues such as this one today. This is the sixth webinar in NASEO's Powering Up Data Centers webinar series. This series explores specific strategies state and territory energy offices can use to address growing data center electricity demand while supporting energy affordability and grid reliability. The goal of this discussion series is to enhance states' understanding of the challenges and opportunities associated with data centers and to ensure that states are better equipped to develop policies and programs to meet the energy needs in their state, propel economic development, and maintain affordable energy for consumers. Recordings of all previous Powering Up Data Centers webinars are available on our website if you've missed them. And as we continue on in this series, we welcome your input on topic ideas. So just a few housekeeping reminders. This is a Zoom webinar format, so only speakers and panelists will have camera and mic access. Please note that following the presentation and moderated discussion, we will have the opportunity for audience Q&A. So please use the Q&A function at the bottom of the page to pose your questions. Please also note that this webinar is being recorded and will be posted on the NASEO website. So just a little quick agenda overview. First, we'll hear from our moderator, Alexa Wojtek, from the Tennessee Department of Environment and Conservation. Alexa will provide opening remarks as well as some perspective from Tennessee. And then we will hear from Dr. Tomás Carvalhas from Oak Ridge National Lab. And Tomás will provide an overview of Mega DC. So Alexa, I will go ahead and pass it off to you.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Camille. And thanks for the opportunity to be a part of this discussion. As Camille mentioned, my name is Alexa Wojtek. I'm the Deputy Director of Programs for the Tennessee State Energy Office, which is housed within the Tennessee Department of Environment and Conservation, otherwise known as TDEC. So to set the stage here, Tennessee, we're obviously very lucky to have Oak Ridge National Laboratory in our backyard. We work with ORNL on really a lot of different topics, leveraging their expertise in transportation, fuel systems, energy efficient mobility systems, advanced modeling, geospatial analysis, buildings research, most recently grid resilience and outage related mapping and analysis through the Grid Deployment Office funded Tasty Grid project, which, as I understand it, NASEO will be hosting a separate webinar to feature the Tasty Grid project. So if you're interested in that, you can look on the NASEO events page to learn more about that. But for purposes of this conversation on data centers, this is another new area of interest for us and an area that we're working with Oak Ridge. So as we know, the topic of data centers is all the rage these days, and it's for good reason, given the energy demand associated with data centers and how that's growing. I know this has been touched on some of the prior NASEO webinars for this series, but I figured I would just note that a recent EPRI report cited that electricity usage by hyperscalers more than doubled between 2017 to 2021, and that this increase is expected to continue with a projection of data centers consuming somewhere between 5 to 9% of US electricity generation annually by 2030, up from 4% today. Camille noted that this series that NASEO is that they've been putting on, this is the sixth webinar in that series, and those have all been recorded. So would definitely encourage you to check out some of the previous conversations that have been had on various aspects of energy use associated with data centers. On one of those previous webinars, I did provide a bit of background on some of Tennessee's experience thus far with data centers, so I won't necessarily repeat what I said then. perhaps that's an incentive to go back and watch some of the previous webinars. But I do want to highlight a couple of new announcements that have been made in the data center space in Tennessee just within the last few weeks. The first is with regard to demand response for AI workloads. And so in early August, on August 4th, Google announced a partnership with the Tennessee Valley Authority, which, for those of you who don't know, provides electricity to 99.7% of our state, to Tennessee, as well as to parts of 6 other states. So Google partnered with TVA and will be using its AI-driven data centers to provide demand response services to the TVA grid. And so Google will be proactively reducing or shifting non-urgent machine learning tasks during periods of peak demand or grid stress. And this is the first time that Google has delivered demand response by specifically targeting those AI workloads. And so the reason that's significant is that it could potentially reduce the need for new generation or transmission, even as the energy demands of AI could continue to grow. The second announcement I wanted to highlight was on an advanced nuclear power purchase agreement. One of the things we hear a lot these days is the potential for nuclear energy to be paired with data centers, and how that could provide around the clock, abundant and reliable electricity. And so on August 18th, TVA again announced that it would be purchasing power from a company, Kairos Power, from their advanced reactor to be deployed in Oak Ridge. And again, this would be to help power Google data centers in both Tennessee and Alabama. And so the Hermes 2 reactor is expected to provide 50 megawatts of firm 24/7 carbon-free energy. And this is also significant because it is the first time a U.S. utility has signed a power purchase agreement for electricity from an advanced reactor. And so these are some exciting developments that I just wanted to flag and put on your radars as you all are thinking of various projects in your states. So to shift back to this conversation, ORNL has received funding from the Department of Energy to provide technical assistance to a number of states, looking at the modeling of energy growth associated with data centers and analytics on siting, optimization to design and develop those data centers in a way that perhaps those data centers aren't just connected to the grid for backup power, but that they could perhaps serve as a grid cognizant load or a grid orchestrated asset. And, Oak Ridge National Laboratory is using their expertise with load modeling and thinking through considerations in the context of cross-state hosting or transmission capacity. Another piece of this that's compelling to us is that they're looking at modeling energy affordability, which we also know is a big priority of the new administration, and how data centers could potentially impact that, and providing this kind of holistic view for decision makers who are thinking through where to site a data center or how to potentially optimize the deployment of that data center. This is also being done in the context of grid resilience and thinking through, where in our state we already have issues with outages or where there could be reliability concerns should a data center be placed there. So I know Tomas will touch more on this and he'll talk about the other states they're supporting. I'll just quickly note that Tennessee is relatively early in this process. So there may be some other states on the line who can share their experiences with the Mega DC project thus far as well. We kicked off a kickoff meeting. We convened a kickoff meeting on August 14th at Oak Ridge National Lab. And so we as the State Energy Office kind of helped play the role of convener to make sure all of the right folks were at the table. In addition to the State Energy Office, we had our State Department of Economic and Community Development. We also had TVA, of course, as that primary generation and transmission utility. And then we had a number of local power companies that, often are the front lines of these requests to site data centers. And to serve those data centers at the distribution level. And so we had both some of our largest urban local power companies from Nashville, Memphis, Knoxville and Chattanooga, as well as Middle Tennessee Electric, which serves an area south of Nashville. And then we also had a number of rural local power companies, smaller local power companies who have either already interfaced with data centers in some form or fashion or are interested in some of the potential that they could bring to their community. So we had a diverse mix of characters at the table. And I would say that at that meeting, Oak Ridge kind of walked us through some of the type of modeling and analysis that they expect to be able to perform for Tennessee and for its utilities. And so those participants were able to give some preliminary feedback on the type of information modeling or geospatial mapping that could be helpful to them in conducting these sorts of trade-off considerations or siting analysis. I'll just quickly note that I would say some of the main themes during that meeting, conversation focused on sources of data from what we currently have access to on data centers where they're being deployed, but also the data fidelity and how accurate that data is and whether we can get more accurate data to work with as we're modeling. Considerations around available electricity capacity and resource adequacy are huge as we're thinking through load forecasting and where to place these data centers. Obviously, the resilience and outage metrics that I mentioned earlier, load flexibility and opportunities to shift load rather than to shed load with data centers, the ways in which we think through economic development incentives and rate design when either attracting these companies or working with them on kind of optimizing how things will be operationalized. Water, gas, and real estate availability, which are obviously large concerns for many of these projects. And then lastly, that energy affordability piece. And so, moving forward, we're going to be setting up recurring meetings with ORNL on this project. And I know they're working on a tool that there should be some sort of a beta version available in the next few months that we can start to react to. And we, on our side, we will also be engaging some of our environmental regulatory divisions. So our air pollution control division, our division of water resources, and so forth, because we do want to make sure that all of the folks who have some sort of a stake in this conversation can chime in on this tool as it's being developed. So I will pause there and I will pass it to our speaker, Dr. Tomás Carvalhais from Oak Ridge National Lab, and he'll be able to walk us through a bit more on this project specifically. So take it away.
Thank you, Alexa. That was a really nice setup for me. You guys should be seeing my slides.
Looks good.
Yep.
All right. Yeah, like it was said, my name is Tomás Carvalhais. I'm from Oak Ridge National Laboratory, specifically their Critical Infrastructure Resilience Group. So today I'll be introducing you guys mainly to our group and what we do, and then giving a high-level overview of the Mega DC project, and then of course we'll move on to the panel and Q&A section. So as Alexa mentioned, we're right in Tennessee in Oak Ridge. Some of you guys might have heard of Oak Ridge before. Some of you guys may not have. We're one of 17 DOE national laboratories. And we have very much a hierarchical structure like many organizations. So at the lab, we're split up by different directorates. So they do everything from national security to material science and nuclear nonproliferation and cyber resilience. We happen to be in the National Security Sciences Directorate. So national security here has a broader meaning. It includes things like economic security, energy security, human security, and so forth. So we sit inside the Geospatial Science and Human Security Division. There are a couple of projects that are kind of our flagship projects, including Landscan, which is a granular population data set globally. So it goes beyond just administrative boundaries and fills in some census gap around the world. Eagle Eye, which you guys might be familiar with, which is a county level 15-minute outage reporting across situational awareness tool, that is. And we, of course, have a set of cross-cutting capabilities. So while we're in the critical infrastructure group, we often work across the division, which has capabilities from high-performance geocomputation, human dynamics modeling and simulation, of course, critical infrastructure resilience, which is very energy-focused for us, but we also look into water systems, even things like railway systems as well. We have capabilities in remote sensing and autonomous systems and a suite of GeoAI efforts as well. Alexa also mentioned a Tasty Grid project that we have had the privilege to work with the Tennessee State Energy Office for quite some time now. So MegaDC actually sits inside this suite of projects, and I won't talk about all these projects. Of course, this talk is about MegaDC, but projects like Tasty Grid is very much the backbone of MegaDC and how we came to develop these relationships and how we came to frame the project into what it is today. So Tasty Grid was born out of the IIJA, Section 40101D, Technical Assistance to States and Tribes, and it's both a tool and a program. So that's very much how MegaDC is kind of growing. It'll be a platform, it'll be a tool, but it's also a program where we engage with states, where we receive feedback from them, and the tool will evolve together, co-evolve with this interaction as well. Of course, Eagle Eye I've already mentioned about. Edgar is another project that's more focused on resilience as a service for utilities. And then, of course, Odin is an outage data initiative that we have across the nation. So MegaDC very much leverages all these capabilities together, everything from cross-sector modeling to outreach and engagement with states, kind of wrap around the MegaDC project. Getting into data centers themselves, as it was mentioned as well, there are a few data sources out there, including proprietary vendors, sources like data centers, datacentermaps.com. And we went through a process of trying to understand what's the best available data source out there for understanding where data centers are proliferating, where they're going to proliferate. And we found that S&P Global is one of those data sets that seems to be more vetted. So they have parts of their team actually drive to different states, drive around to actual sites, ascertain if there's construction or if it's still just a plan, if there's a data center out there. They have a network of consultants that help obtain various attributes. So not just the location of data centers, but what's the data center demand? How many racks do they have? What kind of space is there and how is it being used? And all of that is going to set us up to be able to really understand how data centers are proliferating, not just where, and it'll help us set up the rest of our modeling that I'll show in a few slides. But the point of this slide is just to get at some of what we're seeing writ large as far as data centers, is we're seeing as we interact with different states and as we look at this different data, we see that data centers are moving from primary markets to secondary markets. So this is becoming both an opportunity and a challenge for different states, right? Do they want to get in this proliferation, or is this going to be more of a challenge for them? And I apologize if my phone was ringing there. Looking a little bit more deeply into some of the dynamics that we're seeing, you might have heard NVIDIA having this huge quarter, this past quarter in 2025, over $26 billion, much more than they were expecting, than the board was expecting. And what we're seeing here is that there are innovations happening down to the algorithm level and down to the chip level, to the GPU level. So even things like energy efficiency, NVIDIA's kind of been leading the way there, and we've been seeing that improve despite this load growth. So the point here is to understand that we have to, in modeling data centers, in understanding data center proliferation, we have to understand these opportunities, these energy dynamics that happen down to the chip level, to the data center facility level, the racks, and then the counties, and then the state. So we're kind of aware of how these things are, or at least trying to be aware of how these things are developing. Of course, energy affordability is a huge topic and it's becoming a bigger and bigger topic. We've been noticing that as we interact with different states, and of course, we're seeing in the media even now. Um, I think it's kind of interesting when we first made a slide set for Mega DC, not much more than a year ago. We were thinking about what if we were to get a 1 gigawatt data center, and now we're looking at things like 5 gigawatt hyperscalers in places like Texas. So things are changing quite rapidly, and we're trying to keep up with what's happening in the industry at these different levels. There's even speculation on, can we overbuild data centers? Can we overbuild certain energy related assets? What implications would that have if there is something like a data center bubble? What kind of implications might that have for the grid? So there's a lot going on. And that's the environment that Mega DC is operating in. On the right-hand side, we also see things like consumer sentiment. Environmental organizations are pointing out how much water is being used, environmental impacts, even things like noise are generating that kind of NIMBYism feelings as well. And we see that popping up. So all of that is the backdrop to Mega DC. And we intend to leverage a lot of the capabilities that I've mentioned earlier, everything from geospatial conflation and modeling. We want to take into account land use policy and think about what is the difference once we go into rural and tribal areas. Those areas might have different dynamics. We want to consider urban planning. So everything from permitting to zoning, how does that play into how data centers might be feasible in a place or less feasible? And in that way, we want to go a little bit beyond just siting. We want to think about actual feasibility. Um, of course, we want to look into energy affordability.
It does, Tamaz, it looks like your screen might be frozen. All right, hopefully he's gonna rejoin us and we'll be back on track in a second. Thanks for your patience, everyone.
Um, okay, recording in progress. Thank you guys. Sorry about the mishap there. Um, I'll go really quickly in the interest of time, make sure there's still time for the panel and still time for questions. Um, Basically, I think where we stopped before is basically the backdrop of Mega DC. And I think a lot of the folks in the audience are already familiar with a lot of the challenges. Mega DC is trying to think about what are the opportunities. Can this be an actual opportunity for the grid? Alexa spoke to this briefly, so I'll be very brief as well. This graph gets to that grid orchestration that we're talking about. So what we're seeing is that, of course, data center developers, they move much faster. They're used to a non-regulated environment. So most of the development we're seeing is on that lower left hand of that graph. We're seeing off-grid facilities, or they're using the grid for backup mainly. So the purpose of Mega DC is how can we help and facilitate areas where we can move up that graph towards grid orchestrated, where we have mutual benefits for both data center developers and grid and ratepayers as well. So things like scalability, resilience, and try to mitigate some of these effects of affordability, right? Some of these prototypes, if you will, these 4 prototypes might shift costs onto ratepayers, whereas a grid cognizant asset might have a little bit more awareness, coordination with utilities, and we can get into things like demand flexibility that Alexa was bringing on before. Real quick, here's what we're actually doing with Mega DC, and here's how we distinguish our project from other siting projects. We don't see ourselves as a siting project for data centers. We see ourselves as mainly affordability and regulatory impact modeling, then feasibility, and then we get into which site might work among those that are feasible, among those that are affordable. So this is how we kind of try to set ourselves apart. I've grouped our tasks into 3 major parts. So task 1 and 2, that's your geospatial conflation and affordability modeling. Task 3 is where we leverage some existing capabilities we have, particularly around a digital twin. So we want to have a digital twin for each state that models data centers from a bird's eye view, county by county, down to the facility view. What does the individual data center load profile look like? And then finally, the third part, task 4 and 6, we get into transmission and distribution load modeling. But the idea is, how can we facilitate for state energy offices in collaboration with economic development and data center developers? How can we facilitate the strategy between energy affordability and using data centers as an economic opportunity? How can we balance those two together? Real quick, here's a snapshot of the types of data that we're looking at. We did a literature review and did some of our own thinking, and we see that data more or less lands into either land availability and workforce, infrastructure robustness. So folks want to know how resilient is the power system, how reliable is the power system, but that cuts across fiber, it cuts across water, and then finally the regulatory burden. That's where we get into some of those econometrics that are going to inform our affordability model. This slide has to do with how we develop our software and our platform. I'll just make the point real quick here that we have a dedicated verification and validation process. We have a dedicated team that's separate from the model design team, and we aim to do this V&V process both internally and externally. So we want to know if we're building, not just if we're building the system right, but if we're building the right system. So it's very important to come back around to our customers being the state energy offices here, and to be able to verify and validate what we're doing down to the code level, down to the data inputs. Getting into the weeds just a little bit, very briefly, this graph shows one of our own data centers, Frontier, which is one of the largest supercomputers globally. And what we see is that while it's tagged as a 30 megawatt data center, it's really only peaking above 20 megawatts, less than 1%, sorry, a little bit over 1% over the course of a year. And over a third of the time, we're talking about less than 10 megawatts. So going back to Alexa's introduction, when she spoke about load shifting, instead of load shedding, how can we use this as an opportunity to shift loads? And does this open up more opportunities for data center feasibility in different locations? This slide makes the same point where you see the orange line is the feeder load, the blue line is the data center load, and you can see how some of those can be offset, and we can shift that different ways. So how can we take the synthetic data center profile? Can we do this with a real data center and profile that and bring that kind of knowledge and analytics to the game, so to speak, and help make these decisions? I won't get into this slide very much. This is just how it all comes together in our framework. And I'll leave you guys with a snapshot of what we're not calling a digital twin right now, just a web platform, but eventually will be a 3D digital twin with real-time data flowing in, and you can get that statewide view, and you can go down into the facility level as well. So with that, I'll end with just showing you our scientific advisory board. So when I talked about verification and validation, these folks are external to ORNL. They come from industry and have years of experience, and they help keep us honest, along with state energy offices as we interact with them as well. So with that, I'll end and I'll turn it over for questions and the panel. My email's right there, so feel free to reach out to me if you're interested in the project, or if you have any questions after the presentation. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Tomas. All right, so I'll kick it off by asking a question, and then I think there were a few questions that came up while we were waiting for you to get back online that we could either go back to, or if folks have additional questions that they want to drop in the chat, feel free to do that. Sure. And we can tackle those. And so I'll start with, I'm curious how, if you could speak to, so load forecasting seems to be a big topic, and I think there was a question on this in the chat. Can you speak to some of the ways in which you've seen states think through this, and how Mega DC may be able to help address considerations around load forecasting? I know I've heard anecdotally that, hyperscalers or data center companies will take as much energy as we can give them. And it seems like they have somewhat of an insatiable desire for this energy. And so how do we plan for that? And how do we think about that realistically? How do we know that they're not just asking for a certain amount of load in multiple states at the same time? Like, that's another question that I've heard, where is there potential that the expected load amounts that utilities are grappling with are just double counting, like they're double counting them in multiple locations? I don't know. I don't know if you have thoughts or insights on that, or if you could speak to how Mega DC may think through some of that.
Yeah, certainly. Well, we're definitely seeing that load forecasting is a challenge, and what you mentioned about data center developers looking at multiple states at the same time, kind of double dipping, if you will. We see that happening even at the county level sometimes. So they're looking at multiple counties. And a big challenge we're seeing with different states is that oftentimes, and this is kind of a progressive problem, is as they have town halls and word gets out of data center development, they'll identify a site, they'll identify a load, but they'll end up pulling out due to sentiment or some other reason. So that kind of forecasting is shifting all the time. So while they announce they'll pull out very quickly, we'll say. So that's something that's particular to this industry, where they'll plan for a site, but then they'll end up dropping it, and then that load won't actually be in that location, and they might look at a different county and go there. In terms of ORNL, we have a dedicated team. So I'm here in place of our principal investigator, actually. So I can only speak to load forecasting so much. But we do have a dedicated team that's looking at substations, their locations, transmission, and where, depending where you site, where do we have reserve capacity? So which places might require minimal upgrades rather than a heavier investment. So we want to look at those places first before we start looking at where's an optimal place in some other criteria, but that might require a further investment as well. So there is some flexibility with this, and we rely on our state engagements quite a bit to understand how fast this industry is moving, and understand some of these implications for load forecasting.
Great. Thank you. I'm going to go to a couple questions in the chat. So you had a couple slides there, Tomas, on load shapes, which I think is interesting. We had a question from Glenn Blackman. He said, that they've had trouble with basic data on load shape of data centers. Some say they have a very high load factor, but others say they're pretty variable. It's hard to find actual analysis or data on this. And so I think you noted that this is a synthetic data center. But I'm curious just to kind of speak to that question a little bit more and how states might think through load shapes overall and what that looks like.
Sure. Yeah. What I'm showing here is a synthetic profile. What we're trying to do in the project is partner with data center developers themselves. So take into account an actual facility and get a better understanding of these shapes. For ORNL's data center, for example, that's a particular type of data center, right? We have particular types of jobs and certain use pattern, very predictable use pattern. Whereas some of these data centers that are out there, they're changing. And I think in the beginning of the talk, I was talking about the GPUs and how those are changing, and how the sort of the joules per watt per the joules per token is changing. So because we're going down to that level, we hope that we'll have a better understanding of these profiles and these load shapes. And once we don't have any results right now, but once we start getting these results in, we can work together with states to try to understand how this maps out to different locations and how this maps out to load forecasting and how this can be orchestrated with the grid.
Right. And I noted earlier in my comments on that deal with Google and TVA on demand response, which I think is an interesting one to track and follow. I remember attending another event where some hyperscalers were also speaking to their interest in investing in communities where they were located, where maybe not so much demand response at the data center itself, but that they would be interested in investing in like virtual power plant type solutions within the community that could help during times of peak demand. And so I think that's another interesting potential solution to help with some of the load and the demand at peak times.
Yeah, I personally think virtual power plants really adds that flexibility and helps deal with some of the unpredictability of some of these shapes. I think that's a really good tool to help mitigate that.
Great. I'm not seeing any other questions in the chat at the moment. I'll ask another one here. So you mentioned Tasty Grid at the top of the slide deck. So I'm curious if you could just speak a little bit to some potential reliability issues perhaps associated with data centers, and then what are some intersections between Tasty Grid, let's say, and its outage analysis with some of the data center siting and optimization type analysis of Mega DC?
Sure, sure. In terms of reliability, one of the biggest things we see as we talk to different utilities and do some of our modeling are the ramp up rates for some of these data centers. So they're very uncommon relative to other large loads, industrial loads. So they ought not to be seen as just a large load, but they're more unpredictable. And these ramp up rates sometimes are microseconds, difficult for generation to keep up with. That's a major issue that we see for reliability. In terms of outages, we haven't done, again, just being at the beginning of the project, but we are going to look at how reliability changes depending on the landscape of data centers for different counties. So to talk about Tasty Grid a little bit, we have outage analysis and outage data at the county level. And we have a set of resilience metrics that we look at as well, all at the county level. Because it's based largely on Eagle Eye data, and that's that 15-minute county level data set, we can compute different resilience metrics that go beyond your SAIDI and SAIFI, for example. So recovery durations, what we call area under the curve, which is a funky name for just how many customers are affected over time in terms of outages. So we can look at that in terms of where data centers are located and try to understand how reliability is changing in different places. But I would say that ramp up rate is one of the major issues that just keeps coming up. And somebody brought up the question of different load shapes. That's another one. And as these algorithms keep changing, these GPUs keep changing, those shapes keep changing as well. So that was the purpose of talking about that earlier on. We have to sort of get down to that level to really understand what happens at our level here at the state or county levels.
Great. Okay, so I have a question for, I believe that MegaDC, you're supporting approximately 8 states. What about the states that are not participating in MegaDC? Is there potential resources or assistance that could be made available to other states that may not be, as involved in the hands-on technical assistance piece, that they could still kind of learn from or benefit from ultimately?
Sure, that's a great question. I think just like Tasty Grid, we support a certain number of states with, just ORNL, us ourselves, a certain number of states with direct technical assistance. The tool as a whole, you can request for access for the tool. With MegaDC, we want to arrive at the same type of scaling. So we do intend to scale to all 50 states eventually. The benefit of being one of those 8 states is that you get some results earlier on. You get to influence the development of the platform. But if you want to get connected, I'll put my email back up. You can reach out directly to me, and we can connect you with resources. So pretty soon we'll have reports coming out. We'll have different communications coming out. And once the platform is at a certain technology readiness level, we can look at deploying this, maybe not the entire direct assistance, but the platform will eventually be accessed by other state energy offices as well.
Great. Thank you.